Our story begins back in 1976 when Dinky obtained worldwide rights for Paramount to create die-cast miniatures of the Enterprise and other related Star Trek releases. So the first one they released was the USS Enterprise here, which came out as number 358 in 1976. It was retailed for £2.99. I've been through this in detail in another video, so I won't go through it all again now, but just very, very briefly. Large, quite a large model, really nicely done. Photon torpedo launch in here. You put discs in, spin the disc, and they fire out the front. And you've also got a shuttlecraft, the probably Galileo, you know, in there, and also doubles as a landing sport. US Enterprise, Dinky Toys, Paramount Pictures. No, nicely done. Slightly stubby, but you know, it was a toy, not a most accurate model. And that was followed the following year by, in 1977, by the Klingon, not actually referred to as a D7, but in lore, now we know that's the D7. Very similar. Torpedoes go in here, far out the front, activated by a trigger mechanism. And Dinky Toys, made in England, copyright Paramount, 1977. These were the very first two, as far as I know anyway, die-cast models that ever made out of stuff from Star Trek. So Dinky was there first. These two were also released as a double pack back in 1978. Now, in late 1979, to cash in on the upcoming Star Trek The Motion Picture, prototypes of a small refit Enterprise were designed, number 371, and a Klingon D7 from the series, number 372. Production models were designated as the 801, the Enterprise, and the 802, the Klingon cruiser, and they both had firing missiles. And quite a few of these were cast ready for retail. However, a poor child had died in the US after swallowing a missile from a Mattel Battlestar Galactica Cylon Raider, and it lodged in the poor kid's lung. And there were a number of other injuries related to toy-related missiles. And so Dinky decided to rethink their designs and release the two as non-firing. So the two were then redesigned as the 803, the Enterprise, which you can see in front of you here, and the 804, the Klingon ship. This one. And they both had firing mechanisms removed. The Enterprise had a card disc inserted into the main deflector where the missile would have fired from. So if I show you this, you can see there's the hole the missile would have fired from. And I believe now, like the other video I did on this, that was probably the firing mechanism there, which was removed. The trigger would have been there. And exactly the same as you can see here with the Klingon D7. There, you see the hole underneath? That's where the missile would have come out of. And the trigger mechanism would have been here at the back. Now, in 1980, let's put them both together, right. In 1980, the trade catalogue, the trade catalogue for 1980 came out, and it also featured these two as the 803 and the 804, and it also featured a redesigned Enterprise, a larger scale one, which was the old, I say old, from the 1976. It's only 3 years old. The larger, number 358 larger Enterprise. And what they did with it, they kept the same hull, but they changed the engines. Now, no one has ever seen an actual model of this, and so we think that did not progress beyond a prototype. So it was never released. Now, the initial batches of these little ones, these minis, were destined for the US to the Dinky Club America, where they were sold on from Texas. It does appear that raw castings of some of these metal models were shipped from Liverpool to Texas and may have been packaged and painted there. And it is quite likely that a UK release was imminent for December or January 79 to coincide with the release of Star Trek The Motion Picture. However, it is unclear if any of the missile-firing versions, 801 and 802, ever actually made it to retail. If they did, it would have been in very small numbers. But they do occasionally snap in auctions, so obviously there are some in circulation out there. But the main retail toys were these two that you can see here, the 803 and the 804. Now this is the very tail end of Dinky. They've been in financial trouble for quite a long time. And sadly, on the 30th of November 1979, Dinky went bankrupt and they had to close their doors. This was at the Binns Road factory in Liverpool. The 914 workers were given 15 minutes notice. That's all. And then began a 3-month sit-in at the factory. And it was only a week later, on the 7th of December 1979, that Star Trek The Motion Picture was released.
The Star Trek film brought a huge demand for models at Christmas, but we couldn't get them out of the factory, said one city toy shop owner.
That there had been a plan to sell these two minis in Britain, not just America, appears to be evidenced by the fact that they were displayed on the Airfix stand. Airfix owned Meccano and Dinky at the time, at the Earl's Court toy show at the end of January 1980, even though Dinky themselves were gone and the workers were sitting in the factory. The sitting in the factory lasted until the 11th of March 1980, when the police and bailiffs moved in following a High Court order because they'd obtained a possession order of the factory for the parent company of Airfix. At that point, it was believed there were an estimated £1 million worth of products, both Dinky and Meccano, sitting on the shelves, and they were then shipped out by management over the spring and sold off here and there. And that's probably when the last few sales of these took place in 1980, along with all the other Dinky toys. So sales those had been exported prior to closure continued in the US until stocks ran out in 1980. So the story continues with minis because Corgi comes next. Now, let's bring in the tiny little... Do you know what? I didn't like this one originally, but I think it's quite cute now. It's so ridiculous. But this is Corgi's Enterprise. So, Corgi, following the collapse of Dinky, in early 1982, Corgi obtained the diecast license from Paramount. Permissions were obtained in the spring of 1982, when Star Trek The Wrath of Khan was in post-production. At that point, it had gone in production as The Undiscovered Country, but around about March, it was changed to The Vengeance of Khan, and later changed to Wrath. So, it is thought that that Corgi assumed when they designed these models and received permissions from Paramount that it was still in this window of like a month when it was still officially called The Vengeance of Khan, because when their two models came out over the Enterprise and the Katinga, they were both initially labelled The Vengeance of Khan, not The Wrath. So this is the little stubby Enterprise, and here is the Klingon cruiser, which, unlike the Dinky one, represents the Katinga. The Katinga, of course, was not really in Star Trek Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, though it did appear in a bit of stock footage at the beginning, but a recycled footage from the motion picture during a simulation when the Enterprise comes under attack. But again, it was footage that was reused. So it was quite unusual for Corgi to manufacture spacecraft. All they really done prior to this was the Liberator from Blake 7 back in 1979. In 1980, they marketed the Buck Rogers Starfighter. But apart from that, they did not have a history of the spacecraft. Now, the Enterprise here, look at that little thing there. The primary hull's quite good, actually. The primary hull's not bad. You've even got the right little angle on it there, on the rim, which is quite good. But it's just these weird engines. We think that they're probably this small, stubby shape, just so that they could fit into the packet. Because when they're in the packet, if you'd had like longer ones, like the one in the Dinky had, it probably wouldn't have fitted. So they may have truncated it. At the end of the day, the market of these was kids to play with as a toy, not as a studio accurate model that we have these days. So perhaps it's not 100% surprising. Now the Klingon, this is all metal diecast, plastic engines, which is why a lot of these you find for sale on auction sites and things, the engines are missing because they would have snapped off quite easily. The Katinga, of course, was entirely die-cast metal, although this section at the back, which is the shuttle bay, was in plastic. Some versions of this, I've got one here, are actually released and it was in black, not in white. So apart from that, it's all the same, with a rather ridiculous sticker on it, presumably K maybe for Klingon. Who knows what they were thinking when they designed that. So, yeah, in 1982, in June, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan was released. It was a huge success. But there were very few toys manufactured because loads of toys were manufactured for the Star Trek The Motion Picture, but it hadn't sold very well. It wasn't exactly a kid-friendly toy film, as anybody who's seen the film, which is probably 90% of people watching this, would know. Not really. So manufacturers were a little bit reluctant to put toys out, given the fact they swamped the market with these things back in '79. They didn't really sell. So not many were actually released for The Wrath of Khan. Having said that, The Wrath of Khan was actually a highly successful film, so I'm sure they're all eating their hats later on. But Corgi tried with these two little ones. These two were also released in a double pack as well. Now, in October 1983, Corgi went into receivership, ending their Star Trek Diecast Association. Situation was somewhat like poor Dinky, really. Many workers were laid off at the Swansea plant, 340 in January 1984, which was half the workforce. Following £9 million worth of losses over 3 years. And this left no producers left of Star Trek diecast miniatures. At the end of March 1984, a management buyout with City backing saw the company reformed as Corgi Toys Limited and began to start manufacturing again. The company continued to produce model vehicles, but in smaller numbers than before. So these two, number 148 and 149, appear to have been briefly re-released because new packaging came out, not labelled as The Vengeance of Khan, just Star Trek 2. Although the stocks themselves may have been manufactured before the collapse. However, by then, interest was waning in Star Trek because, The Wrath of Khan had been 18 months earlier. And they were dropped within a few months. Additionally, Corgi, under the new financial arrangements, was a much smaller operation, and they probably couldn't actually afford, at that stage, expensive character licenses such as would have had to obtain these two. And so, there was another little gap. Now, as in 1984, Ertl took up the diecast mantle, having acquired the license after they had taken over plastic kit manufacturers AMT in 1981. Now, Ertl was founded in 1945 by Fred Ertl Sr. It was based in Iowa, and that country gained a reputation for specialising in the production of die-cast agricultural farming equipment. That was their speciality. Back in 1981, Ertl had acquired aluminium model toys from Lesney, or who also owned Matchbox Company. Aluminium model toys you may be more familiar with under the name of AMT. AMT had produced the actual Galileo shuttlecraft for the series and the Klingon D7 that actually, the very ones that featured on the screen. They'd made them, but they hadn't designed them. They physically made the models. And for Star Trek the Motion Picture, they have produced plastic kits of the Enterprise, the Katinga, Klingon, and the Vulcan shuttle. Therefore, via this acquisition of AMT, Ertl acquired the rights to produce Star Trek. They had the license to do it. In 1982, June, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, was released to a huge success, but as we just mentioned, very few toys were created for it, as manufacturers have been put off by poor sales from Star Trek the Motion Picture. Ertl produced no miniatures for the Wrath of Khan. Now, of course, Corgi had collapsed in October, temporarily collapsed in October 1983, going into receivership. So there was nobody manufacturing diecast Star Trek stuff. So in 1984, seeing the potential of a huge merchandise, profits emerged from huge merchandising following the success of the Wrath of Khan, in the summer, AMT under Ertl released a small toy line based on the forthcoming Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. That consisted of 4 action figures and 3 plastic and die-cast metal spacecraft. This is the first one. This is the USS Enterprise, obviously, number 1372, the refit version. So we can see underneath here we have Ertl in Oversville in Iowa, and copyright 1983, Paramount Pictures, all rights reserved. So it's quite a good shape. At least they've got the decals in the proportion here at last, but it's not bad. I mean, the struts are a little thick, but I suppose, again, it's a toy. It's to support the weight of that. They're being robust and being smashed against the floor by kids, so they're a bit thicker than they should be, but it's a toy. We think we can forgive it. Overall, it's a good shape. And it had a stand as well, unlike the others. So there's a bit of blue tack in there. I had it down on the stand earlier. So as you can see, it's not bad. So there's the Enterprise. They did produce 2 more. They also produced the USS Excelsior, which made its debut, of course, in Search for Spock. Here it is, the Excelsior. This is the very first time a Federation non-Enterprise ship had ever been produced in diecast. So the engine's a little bit loose. I do apologise to start wobble. Again, it's not bad. Not bad at all. The scale, of course, is very different to Enterprise. Enterprise, it should be much larger than the Enterprise. Anybody who's seen the film would know, especially the Federation's biggest, most advanced ship yet. And of course, it went on to feature quite a few times in the films. And the Enterprise, well, as the Excelsior and the Enterprise B, slightly rebuilt for that. And of course, featured a lot in Deep Space Nine in the battles with the Dominion. But that's jumping ahead. USS Excelsior, NCC 1799. Very strange, that is, because the registration in the actual film was NX, because Experimental 2000. Why they picked 1799, who knows? It's possible that Ertl, had the design of the ship, but weren't actually informed what the registration number was, and so they simply made one up. They also produced this. And here we have the Klingon Bird of Prey, the first die-cast of this ship as well, in pale blue. Again, the shape's not bad. Oh, I think it needs a bit of dust, doesn't it? Look at that. Yep. Now, who knows why, but why has he got Star Trek written on the side? I'd hate that. I did actually buy this one fairly. We didn't have this as a kid. The Ertl stuff wasn't really particularly available in Britain as much. So, the overall shape's not bad. I mean, Star Trek written on the side. I mean, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, imagine if Death Star had Star Wars written on the side of it. Crazy stuff. But overall, it's good. It's just one single piece of metal mounted on the stand here. So there's our 3 from Star Trek: The Search for Spock. Nobody did the Grissom, unfortunately. Nobody did the Oberth class. That had to wait for a future time.
Star Trek 3. Ertl Company will sell toy spaceships, action figures, model kits, and you'll also be able to purchase novelizations, related books, calendars, a soundtrack album, role-playing board games and puzzles. Pepsi Cola also plan a Star Trek link-up, according to EdAge.
This is the role-playing game referred to in the previous quote, produced by Games Workshop in the UK under license from FASA. There's instruction manuals. Anyway, that's for a future video. I won't digress now. Now, it appears that these three were only available from 1984 to 1985, as none were released under the Star Trek 4 packaging. Star Trek 4 came out in November 1986 and featured no new ship designs. They simply reused the Enterprise, of course, the Reliant, the Grissom, the Excelsior. They didn't build any new ones. So there was really nothing new to make, and there was no Star Trek 4 merchandising. So if we jump ahead to June 1989, we have the release of nobody's favourite one, the Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier. And what Ertl did with these is that they re-released two. They re-released two. Mine's still in its packaging here, so I won't take it out. I'll zoom out a little bit. It's the Star Trek 5 packaging, June 1989. And what they did with this one, as you can see, it's exactly the same as the other Enterprise, but they have changed the registry to NCC 1701A because, as I'm sure you all know, a new Enterprise was given to the crew at the end of Star Trek 4 with the A suffix. And here it is. They also released the Klingon Bird of Prey in better colours, not bad at all actually. Now looking much better than the previous one. I'll show you a quick close up of that. Much better. The green is much better. Yeah, I've even got the red underneath. So there we are. That's it. That's our die-cast Ertl produce. And that pretty much rounds up the early days of Star Trek die-casts. Many other firms went on to produce them later on, Johnny Lightning and all sorts of other people. So, but this is the early days anyway, and I thought you'd enjoy that quick look. All right. So just to finish off, here they are all together. So from left to right, here's Dinky, 1979 Enterprise. The D7 from 79. Corgi, 82, with their Katinga, 82. Ertl from 84, with their Bird of Prey, 84. And of course the Excelsior from 84 as well. And lastly, from 89, there's the rejigged Bird of Prey in new colouring. Okay, I thought you might enjoy that, so thanks very much for watching, and keep tuned for something else, and please like and subscribe. Thanks ever so much, and live long and prosper. Bye bye.